I'm very pleased to introduce the Honorable Dante B. Fascell, representative in the U.S. Congress for the 19th District of Florida, and most importantly, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives. Mr. Fascell was born in Long Island, but has been a legal resident of Florida since 1925. An attorney by profession, Mr. Fascell served in the Florida State Legislature before being elected to the 84th Congress in 1954. As a member of Congress for over 30 years, Mr. Fascell has served on many committees and was chairman of a number of subcommittees, such as the Subcommittee on International Organizations, International Political and Military Affairs, and Inter-American Affairs. He presently serves as chairman of the Subcommittee on Arms Control and the Subcommittee on International Security and Science, in addition to his previously mentioned chairmanship of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, of which he has been a member since 1957. It is with a great deal of pleasure that I welcome the Honorable Dante B. Fascell to the Baltimore Council. And of course, it's self-evident regarding the importance of the House and his committee on the subject of foreign affairs. Mr. Fascell will speak to us tonight on the subject of American foreign policy, a bipartisan approach.
Mr. Bolton, thank you very much. And my dear friend, Senator Sarbanes and his wife, and Congressman Steny Hoyer, and dear old friend Eddie Garmatz, who's back here somewhere because I talked to him. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased and honored, amazed, surprised, frustrated at being here. I'm pleased because it's such a large turnout and you have such a distinguished reputation, the Baltimore Council. It's a great privilege for me to have the opportunity to talk to you about things of mutual interest. And then I look at this view out here and see what all of you have done. And where I come from, we like to think we're an international kind of area, you know, but I must say, I told our sponsors here tonight from the Providence Bank, and thank you, gentlemen, all of you, for sponsoring this event. I told them, well, I have to go home now and raise a little cane. We've been piddling around and haven't come up with anything as good, as great as what Baltimore's done. And in the short space of the time that I've been in the Congress, no longer can you say that 30 years ago when Eddie Garmatz started out trying to take money from the rest of the country to provide for improvements in the port at Baltimore, having the vision of what would happen and be here today, can we say that it's a sleepy little town where they used to roll the hogsheads of tobaccos down the road in order to ship them out? Today you see, and I see, a truly international city. And that's frustrating for me in Miami, but we're going to do our best to catch up with you. You've set an excellent example. I'm slightly timorous, I guess I would say. I feel a little bit like bringing coals to Newcastle when I see all of you here who are so interested in international events and foreign policy. I wonder what's going to happen to me later on. I want you to know that there's not much of me left. When I started out 30 years ago, I was tall and handsome like Steny Hoyer and Paul Sarbanes. And when everybody got through with me, there's not much left. So I thought what I'd do tonight is start out, and rather than give you a grand tour de force of the world in terms of the viewpoint of the United States, since everybody is an expert in foreign policy and seriously has their own opinion on the subject, I would reasonably stay close to the subject matter that was assigned to me and talk about some things that we're trying to do in the Congress, and then open it up for questions until our allotted time has expired. Question is always asked, and I just got through doing some interviews for foreign press correspondents, And it's amazing, you know, you feel like you're doing Civics 101 again, always, about how our system works. They know it, but they just don't believe that that's the way it works. You know, you talk about the separation of powers and who has a responsibility for making foreign policy. And I have to repeat over and over again to these people that, you know, if the president says anything or writes anything, that is the foreign policy of the United States. That's his privilege, it's his prerogative under the Constitution. And then they say, yeah, but what does the Congress do? Well, that's a good question. A lot of people ask us that too. Well, we can provide the money if the president tries to implement the policy. We can take the money away if we don't like to, if we don't like the policy. We can make policy statements of one kind or another by either making speeches on the Senate floor, and they do listen to senators. I mean, they really do. And there are only 100 of them. And it's a very important thing to be a United States senator and have some command of the media. Not equal to the president, of course. The president says anything. He can sneeze and make front pages of every newspaper in the country and be on every television show. But a senator is listened to. On the House side, it's a little bit more difficult. 435 of us, we get elected every 2 years. Most people don't know who we are. And the media has a hard time without a program figuring out who the players are. And but we try to get heard. And we do that through policy statements in legislation. And the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee, and Paul and I have worked together on many of these matters. We get together to try to formulate some policy in some way conditioned on the legislation which is before us, in the hopes that we will have some impact on the administration, on whoever the president is, or the Secretary of State, or whatever. And we just keep digging at it. And we do it through personal contacts. In short, we use what limited tools we have, because the power of the purse is a very blunt instrument. And it's very difficult to mobilize the power of the purse against a policy. But it can be done, and it can be done successfully, as was done in the case of Vietnam. And there are some other cases. Human rights cases, for example, which was a congressional initiative. When the Congress just felt that no administration up to that time had really put enough emphasis on the whole question of how human rights fitted into, or should fit into, the foreign policy relationships of the United States and other countries. The Congress stepped in and said, first, as a matter of policy, we think human rights is important. We think you should consider these matters in the relationships with country X. That went on for a few years, and we didn't seem to be getting anywhere. So one year we just simply said, of the money that was supposed to go to country X, we are deducting $100 million because they have an atrocious record on human rights. We started getting people's attention, and we started getting some attention. And we started getting some attention from our own administration in power at that time. And we made some other legislative changes. So we're able to impact in that fashion on the things that confront us. And, you know, we limited power in the media, public education, using the power of the purse, passing resolutions, and otherwise in personal contacts with our colleagues and the administration. We try to have some impact as your representatives on what the administration is doing. So it's not all just simply automatic. For a long time it was felt that the president, after World War II, just could say anything, do anything, send troops anywhere, make any decisions that he wanted to on behalf of the country, and the Congress simply rubber stamped it. I'm afraid that was really almost true. Now that's changed quite a bit. There is a great deal of discussion about the commitments being made by a president, any president, not this one, but any president, in the Congress. Starting with perhaps, I don't know, I don't want to say that Vietnam was a turning point, but it's as good as any you can find right away, in which the Congress said, now wait a minute, you know, we have the right to declare war. The problem has been undeclared war, where We have been trying to implement the policy of the United States through some other system indirectly, where it's not as clear as simply somebody invaded a country and we had to respond in one way or another. And the Congress became more and more involved in that issue. We passed the War Powers Act. We put limitations on expenditures. We tried to say, hey, wait a minute. If you're going to the administration or to a president, if you're going to commit the American people, either financially or personally, the families, our children, you're going to commit us, well, we feel, we insist, we demand that the elected representatives of the people, who under the Constitution have the sole right to declare war, be included in on the decision-making process. Not so easy to do. Very difficult, admittedly. But we need something more than what we have had, which is simply a notification saying, you know, trust me, follow me, I'm about to do this, or I have done that and you must support me. Well, a president has the right to say that. He has the right to go over the heads of the Congress and go to the American people and insist on his position. But we have the responsibility also to say, now wait a minute, as long as we're elected, we have a responsibility to be in on this act, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether anybody likes it or not. Now, it's easy for the people to get rid of us. On the House side, we have to run every 2 years, which means we run constantly. That's the way the system was designed. We're supposed to be closer to the people. We're not isolated like senators. That's not fair, you know, because senators run all the time, too. They have to. Now, I don't know how many counties there are in Maryland, but in Florida, there are 67 counties. And if you had to run and you had to go to every county and you only went to one county and two major cities in that county, each month you'd be running forever and never get back to your hometown. So they run constantly, too. But, you know, the system was designed that way. It's called the people are in control. They can throw us out if they don't like us. And that's the best part of the whole system, because it makes everybody really responsive. Now, you might note, if you look carefully, that I have a blue aura all the way around me. It's about 3 feet wide. Blue is a very good color, by the way. It means you're healthy, energetic, bright, and all those good things. But I have an aura, but it really is an electromagnetic field, I must tell all of you. It comes from all the antennae I have grown that reach out and touch people to say, what are they saying? What do they want? What do I do now? How do I respond? That's our job as senators and members of the House, to do our best to represent you. And that we all do in one measure or another. And we get kicked around a lot because it seems to be a lot of fun. But the truth of the matter is that we have men and women in all walks of life, come from all over the country, and you put everything in this pot and stir it up, and everybody's got an idea. Everybody is bright, everybody is determined, everybody's intelligent, everybody's sincere. And you wonder if anything ever comes out when you grind it up in the mortar and the pestle that anybody can recognize or live with. But you know what? We've done it, and we managed to do it, and it's still the best system known to man. Now, how about these discussions that we get into with the President of the United States? Well, I think most people would agree that you wouldn't want us to simply be rubber mats. We got elected to use our brains. And yes, a bipartisan foreign policy is a great idea. It ought to be. The people of this country should unite behind a policy they can support. No foreign policy initiative, but particularly one which commits the manpower of the country of the United States, or a large sum of our money, is going to be worth anything if it's not understood, supported by the American people, and ultimately understood and supported by the Congress of the United States. It isn't worth anything. I don't care how great the president is, because our system demands this kind of activity. But it takes two to tango. A president has to take the lead in making bipartisan foreign policy. He simply cannot say, it's time to charge, follow me. That's not going to happen that way. You know, we've been that route. We don't want to go that route. It's more important to say, now, gentlemen, we have a serious problem. Let's talk about it and let's see what we're going to do together. A president, in short, has to reach out to the public and to the political parties and say, we are going to do our best to have a bipartisan foreign policy. Now, that does not mean a one-way street. It means everybody has some input. And we try to reach a decision, a consensus, if you will, which will allow people of differing views to say, okay, we've made a compromise here that maybe neither side likes or neither party, but we're going to live with it because it's in the best interest of the United States to go this route. And that's been done. It's been done in the past. It's been done under this administration. We need to do more of it, however. And we are crying out right now, today, in this country, for that kind of consensus. And, you know, the election tells us one thing. The election tells us that President Reagan was immensely favored by the people of this country to be president of the United States. But the responsibilities of working out a bipartisan foreign policy, nonetheless, are not to be shunted aside simply because that happened. We didn't abolish the Congress any more than we abolished the judicial branch of government. We still expect the government to work the way the Founding Fathers meant it to work. That is, to have the three co-equal branches of government involved in the process. Now, if a president does not really extend himself to say we will have a bipartisan foreign policy, and in my case, say Fascell, as a member of the Democratic Party and chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, we want you to sit in on this, and here's our problem, here's what we're going to do, what do you think? Now, more and more that's beginning to happen, and I hope it continues that way, because there are sharp cleavages of difference that exist about the foreign policy of the United States in specific areas of the world, and it's not simply just a question of rhetoric. So we need to do that, and it's vital for us to do that, because every one of these issues, every one of these events could be a major event. We can't take anything lightly, and it's very difficult after the fact to come back and say, well, you know, too bad. Should have really thought about it at that time and brought you in on it. Classic case of disappointments, for example, that came, or, well, let's go the other way. Let's go affirmative. Let's talk about a classic case, and that was the Lebanon resolution. The president came to the Congress and worked out a compromise of the conditions, the length of time, and the manner in which the Congress would endorse the president taking the action that he took. Totally supported. Now, the aftermath, that was something else again, because there, with the death, unfortunately, of 240, 260 men, never anticipated, where we got into a real dispute as to whether or not, when it became apparent that the purposes for which the resolution and the purposes for which it was thought that the United States was in Lebanon as part of that multilateral force had changed, that some action was not taken. That dispute was a legitimate dispute. But the point is that in starting that process, there was a genuine effort to achieve bipartisan direction. And we need more of that. Grenada was a different case. The president acted on his own. And it was only after the fact that a consensus developed, both in the public and in the Congress of the United States, about whether that action should be supported. And I won't go into all of the reasons as to why that was done, but among the reasons are, one, it was reasonably quick, and two, it was reasonably successful, and three, there was a loss of life, but it wasn't as great as anything in Lebanon. And so it was accepted. But that is still a dangerous gamble. Still a dangerous gamble. Now, the president has the right, indeed he has a responsibility, if he wants it under the Constitution, to protect American lives abroad and to take such action as he may deem fit. And that means to command the troops as commander-in-chief. And if he chooses to declare war, in effect, he can take his case to the American people, because if it is deemed to be a violation of the Constitution, the only recourse that we have would be to impeach a president or to vote him out of office on the next go-round. Well, impeachment is a very blunt instrument. It's like trying to use the power of the purse. Doesn't work. So it's far better to devise mechanisms, which we tried to devise in the Congress, whereby we would have constant, thorough, and immediate consultations with the president when, to use the old expression we all use, that we're in on the takeoffs as well as the crash landings, because we see that as a function of the Congress. So I have done my best in what small purview of responsibility I have to work the best I can with the two parties and the administration to achieve a bipartisan effort. It's not always easy because opinions are strongly held and they become very emotional in the heat of discussion. But we've had some success on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm proud to say. And we'll continue our best to do that and hope that we can keep to a minimum those areas where we have major disputes, where the Congress is going one way and the President's going the other. But there are going to be some major ones on those kind of decisions. We got a weapons system, which is coming up for a vote tomorrow, and we're debating now in the House. The Senate's already done that. And about 10-vote differential, Paul, in the Senate. I don't know what it'll be in the House. I don't have a head count. But as the Speaker pointed out there are 13 less Democrats there this time who voted against the MX missile. And that means perhaps there'll be 13 less votes. And there's some things that have happened since the last vote that were not immediately apparent in terms of putting new factors into the consideration of this issue. So we're not sure what that vote will be. It'll be a very close vote. But the country's been debating the issue of the MX for years and years and years. And just like 10 years ago, we did the great debates on the ABM system. And we made a decision on ABM. And that's not only a military decision in terms of hardware, but it's basically a major foreign policy decision. So that the point I'm making is very obvious, that inextricably linked with foreign policy decision-making is a decision made on a weapons system, which sometimes appears as if it's only a production line with one of your favorite companies, and winds out really being the basis of a foreign policy decision for years into the future. And we have to be very careful about that. Strategic Defense Initiative is one of those issues, very clearly. Now, the Congress has supported the President totally with respect to the research request. But we have drawn a cautionary note and reservation when we say, now, Mr. President, let's be careful if we start testing this technology. Let's be careful, because if we, in the testing of this technology as we proceed, get carried away with our technological capability and we violate the ABM treaty, we're going to have to then be confronted with either drafting a new one and working on it, or we have other problems. So we have to be very careful about how far we go with this. And already the Soviets have said, because they're already doing their research on their Strategic Defense Initiative, and because of our increased emphasis that has come about in the last year, they have now said we will proceed full bore with even greater emphasis on our offensive systems in order to overwhelm or penetrate whatever defensive system your technology can produce. And the issue then, as a foreign policy issue, is how long do we let this go on? What do we do about it? Now, I want to be as strong as a nice guy. Somebody pushes me around, I want to knock him down. I don't want to be pushed around either. But the question is, if you have the capability of being secure, and you have the capability of destroying yourself and the rest of the world already, how secure is secure? And where are we going? That's why these talks are so important. These talks are so important. We got a good delegation going there, with Max Kampelman as the head of the delegation. I see where the president brought him back to do a little lobbying. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that happens every day around Washington. And Max is a good salesman. He's going to tell everybody how important it is for the Geneva Conference, which just got underway, to have the MX so he can waive the Soviets in terms of the negotiation. And that's a legitimate ploy, and that's a factor that some people will consider as important. But the whole issue of where we go with this new program now, because of the pressure of technology, is always there. But to use it, to implement it as part of a government policy in order to have it applied, the application of that technology to military hardware, is making decisions for us way into the future. We don't even know if we can deploy this system yet, and they're already talking about stations in space that are going to be weapons stations, laser mirrors that will be out of sight, that will reflect laser technology, and the items of destruction go on and on and on ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Now, you know, these are all very vital matters to the American people because our future forever is involved in it, and we can't just make decisions on the basis like things like, well, you know, it's better to have 5 locks on your door instead of 1. You know, maybe we better take a look at the neighborhood. And other kind of things of that nature. We need, in short, to explore every nook and cranny of the tremendous capability of intelligence of mankind, but particularly ours in this country. We don't take a back seat to anybody. You know, I happen to think the Soviets are paranoid, but what's that got to do with anything? And I don't trust them, they don't trust us. Now, we know what the challenge is. We're all problem-oriented people, so how do we meet that challenge without blowing each other up? That's the ultimate foreign policy question in my judgment. It's the only reason I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Or otherwise I'd be on Merchant Marine and have a nice harbor like this one. But I'm there because it's the ultimate fundamental question. When do you go to war and when don't you? Well, one of the answers to that question is you should never go to war. If you can possibly avoid it with honor. The other thing is you better be ready to protect yourself if you have to. But in the meantime, you ought to do everything at your command and intelligence to see if you can figure out some other way to do it. The ultimate test of foreign policy. Our objectives as a nation are honest, decent. We have a remarkable record of assisting people around the world. We're going to deal with the foreign assistance program here shortly in the Congress. We're working on it now, both in the House and the Senate. One of the most unpopular programs in Congress. Very tough to get people to vote for it. Say we have no constituency, you know, and yet the record of the American people in our own interest in going out and helping other people around the world to develop their economies. Is that important? It's sure important right here. We got a trade deficit now going to $160 billion, the highest in the history of the world. And it ought to be going the other way. Of course, with you guys here, as long as it goes both ways, that's great, you know, and that's fine too, but we can't keep that up very long without doing something. One of the things we can do is help other people, other countries, to develop their economies so they have the capability to buy from us. Foreign assistance, dirty word, conjures up visions of Uncle Sam half inebriated in a pink Cadillac throwing dollar bills out both hands like this. Not true. It's in our own self-interest. Part of that foreign assistance is military assistance. Where would Israel be right now if we were not committed to helping the only friend we've got in the Middle East with $1.8 billion in military assistance? $1.2 billion in economic assistance. And Egypt and the other countries who are trying to work to see if out of that cauldron we can't bring something called peace with honor within secure boundaries. Foreign aid is what it's called. We passed the first bill in 3 years in the House last year with a lot of hard work and sweat by 6 votes. And we're going to try to pass a bill in the House and the Senate this time. Chairman Lugar, my counterpart in the Senate, agrees that we need to have an authorization bill. We're going to try to pass that bill. We need everybody's help. We need your help. I'm asking you for your help. We need to pass that bill. It's in the interest of Baltimore and Maryland and the United States. It's in the interest of our friends. And when you look at the whole record of what you have done as Americans around the world, you have every reason to be proud of what the American people have done in trying to assist other people in the world to do what? To be independent, to be sovereign, to be peaceful, to have a place in the sun, to have a future for their kids. And we have so much to do. We have so much to do. With 2/3 of the world tonight, right now, being hungry, malnourished, dying of starvation, ill-clothed, ill-housed, uneducated. We ignore 2/3 of the world at our peril. It is in our interest to do everything we can to reach down in here and do what we can to promote their economic well-being and their survival, because it ultimately means our survival. A function of foreign policy, a function of your government. Now, my time is up. I wanted to get into something that's closer to my heart, but we'll have to leave that another time, and that's talking about communications, how we communicate with people or how we don't communicate with people. But I'll make a long story very short. The United States is so far behind the 8 ball in our ability to communicate with other peoples around the world, to let them know what we are, who we are, and that we're good guys, that it just stuns me. We're operating with equipment that's held together with chewing gum and baling wire that belongs in the Smithsonian Institute. And we have a fear of going on and communicating and talking and reaching to the minds of people to say, hey, we assume incorrectly that everybody understands democracy, everybody understands how great it is, everybody understands the freedoms we talk about. Well, they don't. We have to tell them about it. We have to demonstrate it at home, that's for sure. We can't live with the park flag in the United States, and we need to do everything we can to solve our own problems. But we need to communicate with the rest of the world on the blessings that we have under this system, which have given us more freedoms than any group of people in the history of man, and have given us more of the material things of life than any group or nation of people in the history of man.
You didn't know that Civics 101 could be that interesting or inspiring. The question is, will the Geneva meetings include the subject of human rights?
The answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. When the Secretary of State Schultz met with Gromyko, several of us, at my insistence, intervened with the Secretary to make sure he raised that issue with Gromyko. Having worked with Max Kampelman for 3 years at Madrid as the head of the U.S. delegation of the Helsinki Accords, I can assure you that our ambassador, who's the head of that delegation, will raise the issue many, many times.
The question is, to what degree does our foreign assistance prop up Mr. Marcos's government in the Philippines?
Well, it's hard to put a dollar figure on, and I wouldn't do that, but the philosophical question is a fair one. We do not have a choice in terms of absolutes in this world, and that's sometimes unfortunate. We in the Congress and in the House Foreign Affairs Committee and in the Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate have raised the issue with respect to the question of democratization and human rights and repressions in the Philippines. And we need to do that. But when I say that human rights has been raised to a very high level in discourse, international discourse, it has. We've provided, not only through the Helsinki Accords, but through other acts of presidents now, we've firmly established that the issue of human rights is a very important factor to be considered in determining the relationships between the United States and another country. I didn't say the sole factor, I said an important factor. Now you have to say it that way if you're going to be reasonable, and I'm sure you want to be reasonable, because there are other interests as well. There are security interests, there are economic interests, and there's a limit to how much pressure you can put on another government. So you have to, it's a question of a mix of judgment, you know. Do we want to cut a program that assists the people of a country because we disagree with the leadership in a country? Do we close down our bases that are vital in the Pacific area because we disagree with the activities of that government? And any government at any time, ultimately, if it's pushed too far, can say, look, we are a sovereign, independent nation. We're going to do what we want to. You, the United States, can do what you want to. So it's a question of judgment. That is what diplomacy is all about. It's tact, it's leverage, it's using your persuasive capability, it's using the tools you have to get where you want to go without having to run over the other person. You do the best you can. It's not always pleasant. We've got problems in Chile with the present government, still in a state of siege. You know, we got great progress in Argentina, where you have a changeover that's remarkable to a democratic form of government and a person who is committed to human rights and democratic institutional building. Now, our country, however, in final analysis, can't use the absolute rule, because you do that, you couldn't do business with anybody, perhaps, for one reason or another, if you always dealt in terms of absolutes. So we have to take the world the way it is. We do the best we can. We stand foursquare for our values. We try to promote our value systems. We encourage other people to do the same, and hope for the best.
I think the question is, do additional bargaining chips really help in negotiation?
Well, in a general sense, the answer to that is yes, if it's truly a bargaining chip. But the point that he makes is a very good point, which is that at somewhere you have to determine that additional bargaining chips in terms of additional strength really does not become a bargaining chip, because you're already there. You're already at a plateau of mutual destruction. That's the point he was making. And if you go beyond that, then do you really have a bargaining chip? And the answer is no. You really don't. You're not going to scare anybody, because it's got to be predicated on fear, the whole theory. You accelerate in the arms race to get the advantage on the other person because you're going to wipe them out. Well, if you can already wipe them out and then you keep going up and spending more and more money, eventually at some point, you know, he gets nervous and he says, well, I better do the same thing. That's what's been happening. That's what's happening now. The Soviets decided to harden their silos. They put 3/4 of their missile force on land, which is fine for them. I didn't think it was too smart, but I'm not running that. I like our system a lot better. Now, we put our missiles in, and then when they got they got hardened silos, we thought, uh-oh, we better do something about that, because that gives them a first strike capability, because if they shoot at us and we shoot back and we can't wipe that out, you know, and it goes on and on and on. And so we decided we had to have a hard kill capability. So we're going to build a missile that does that, because it's going to be more accurate, more powerful, and it's going to drop right down the smokestack at 6,000 miles. Now, you got to understand that the differential we're talking about is roughly in a magnitude of 800 feet at 6,000 miles. And we're going to get it so it goes this way, zoop. And that's what we're paying for. And it is a very real question. Frankly, that's the reason I haven't supported the MX. We're already at the point, in my judgment, of mutual destruction. That's the way I see it.
Does the congressman have any information on the possibility of the South Korean government being asked to support a Contra movement in Nicaragua if the Congress does not fund the same?
No, I don't have any information on that, but I want to tell you why it's a constant rumor, because there's such a great temptation to have the South Koreans do the fighting for everybody because they're so courageous and tough. They want to send them everywhere. But no, and I don't think it'd be a good idea, frankly.
When the present president of South Korea visits the United States in April, will he be asked by the Congress or the administration, the Congress, to try to modify the present conduct of democracy in that country?
And the answer to that is most assuredly yes. The question is whether or not the SDI is an outgrowth of the High Frontier Study. And I don't know what it's an outgrowth of. We got so many studies lying around in those secret rooms of the Pentagon, it'd be hard for me to say. The answer is I don't know whether it is an outgrowth, but because there have been a lot of studies on the question of how to get out into the space with a variety of either hardened satellites or satellite kill or interception of missiles, etc. And questions of how you deal with decoys, how you deal with magnetic pulses, and you know, all of those studies. And I think probably my own guess is, without knowing at all, my own guess is that all of these studies were proceeding out there independently, and all of a sudden somebody just put them all together as a concept.
Would you comment on the concept of war as big business?
Well, I've heard that said, of course, many times, and one has to be careful about reciting either old myths or otherwise getting into an adage quoting contest with respect to war. But other than to say that obviously a great deal of money is spent, and studies are made by many institutions on the amount of money that the world spends on armaments, much less war, just on armaments alone. So, it'd be, I can't, it's just absolutely astounding. I once did a comparative study just for quick reference purposes. It was many years ago, but at that time, what was being spent would have provided an ample house for every single human being on Earth, which I thought was a far better way to go. But you know, we're in a philosophical discussion. War, frankly, is stupid. You know, it's very hard to persuade somebody after you've killed them anyway. But having said that, I'm not one of those people who's just going to lay down and let somebody run over me, because that seems to be their idea about how to run the world. I am willing, as the American people are in my judgment, to fight for their values. And I'm not prepared, either as an individual or as a representative, simply to discard the values. So while I have a healthy respect for the need for the military, however, I also have a healthy respect to be wary, as President Eisenhower put it, of the defense establishment and its tie-ins with our economic system all over the country. Somebody once pointed out, so don't hold me to this because I can't recall what the citation was, that 55% of our economics in this country is on a military system. So, you know, that's pretty big. I think that's frankly very high, but it's high enough to make the point that you're making. Yes, it is big business.
The question is, how do we defend ourselves from the competitive advantages which we've engendered by our aid and goodwill?
First of all, I think you'd have to start by saying that it is a mark of the success of our foreign policy that there has been this kind of economic miracle in Japan, that it was possible. The Japanese, of course, get all the credit for doing what they have been able to do in a competitive world in terms of quality and in terms of marketing and in terms of their financial skills, because they are good at all of that. A same benchmark can be used in Europe. It's a measure of the success of American foreign policy that the rebuilding of Europe came about, and now we have tremendous conflicts, you might say, or competition with the European Economic Community over a variety of subjects, not the least of which are citrus and cotton and agricultural products. At a time when our farmers in this country are suffering like they've never suffered before, we've never seen farm income and farm disruption in this country, not since the great days of the Dust Bowls and the Great Depression. And there are not too many people out here I see who remember that, but I do. I grew up in that, and I don't want to see another one. But yes, we have to be careful about that. I'm basically a free trader, okay? But having said that, and recognizing the problem of the Japanese, I joined on the bill for domestic content legislation with respect to automobiles, which was the big thrust. And we use that as a bargaining chip, if you will, into trying to talk to the Japanese and saying, let's voluntarily agree on what we're going to do. Now, a free market is great, and free trade is great if everybody plays by the same rules. But if one government's going to subsidize its industry and another government's going to put up non-tariff barriers and we're trying to play by the rules, we're going to have an awful problem. We got so much of a problem now that out of that $160 billion deficit estimated for this year, about $40 billion of that's Japan alone. So we need to talk to them more hard turkey. And we need to let them understand that they have to remove the barriers which keep us out of Japan, give us an opportunity in electronics and other areas to get into that market. Or else they're going to see legislation just doing this, and that would be a mistake in my judgment. But Japan's not the only problem we have. We got high deficits in this country. We got high interest rates in this country. We got a lot of other things we're doing that are not too smart either. Isn't it about time that, that we had ratification of the Genocide Treaty? I agree with you. We should have it. And the Ottawa meeting on human rights and the Helsinki Accords, which came about as a result of the Madrid conference, was one of the things that our Helsinki committee insisted on with our delegation. We took the lead in that in order to have a balanced group of meetings in the interim between the review conference in Madrid and the conference coming up in Vienna, which is the next major review conference. The Soviets wanted only the Stockholm Conference on disarmament in Europe, we insisted that we had to have an interim conference on the question of human rights of equal dignity, so that it was clear that whatever discussions went on in the international fora, that the issue of human rights and the question of disarmament would be linked in that fashion. And yes, the United States, if it continues to expound and to be the leader in the human rights field, and I believe we are, we need to ratify the treaty. The question was whether or not the new policy being implemented by the aid agency, which now would deny funds to those family planning organizations and who are working in countries which permit abortion, whether or not that policy will be turned around by the Congress by virtue of an amendment which is expected to be offered. Because what happened is that the subcommittees having jurisdiction over the subject matter have already proposed to the full Committee on Foreign Affairs that the policy be turned around. And therefore, you see, you were right after all. Therefore, those who support the present administration policy will have to offer an amendment to cut that out, to delete it, and leave the policy the way it is, which has been changed from the old policy. And wait a minute, I didn't get to the answer yet. That's just a question.
I just wanted to know that he's won another vote.
Now, the answer to your question is no, the Congress will not be able to change that vote. I don't know how many votes we've had in the House. It seems like to me I vote on the question of abortion every other hour on the hour every day. But the issue has been lost in the House innumerable times. And while there seems to be, I believe, a majority, I haven't taken a head count on this, of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, which would favor changing the present restrictive policy to the more generally reasonable, acceptable policy of the past. There are not enough votes in the House, and I think it's some moot question.
Yes, sir.
Question is, do we have a foreign policy in Central America, and if we do, what is it and whose is it? Well, the answer is yes, we do have a foreign policy. Yes, it does belong to this administration, and in part supported by the Congress of the United States. Now, what is it? The answer is, the what is the establishment and the maintenance of democratic institutions and primarily forms of government. And under two administrations now, the American people, through the Congress and through the President, have supported the maintenance of a more democratic government in El Salvador. And certainly under President Dante, I think tremendous strides have been made, and the people of El Salvador have certainly demonstrated under the most awesome conditions that they are determined to give democracy a chance in that country. And our policy has been to try to do everything we can to assist both politically, economically, and militarily for the maintenance of that system. With respect to the other countries, we are concerned for their economic well-being, Costa Rica being a classical case of excellent democracy with a long track record, but in dire economic trouble, needs our assistance, and we're going to try to provide additional assistance. Honduras, trying to stay alive with a civilian government, and the question that arises there as a matter of policy is one of how much or too much in terms of U.S. assistance and what kind. The concern on some quarters is that if we rely too heavily on military assistance in Honduras, that in effect takes away from the capability of a civilian government to maintain itself and empowers the military to a greater degree, and that this would bring about an undesirable change in Honduras. Ultimately, even though its purpose is laudable in the sense that we're trying to keep some pressure on Nicaragua, which started out with the objective of simply having a revolution to throw out an undesirable dictator, and then subverted that revolution in order to install a Marxist-Leninist system, which is their privilege and their business if they want to, but not when they suddenly extended that and started espousing the idea that the revolution must be extended to the other nations in the Central America. Now, when they started doing that, carrying out this extensive rhetoric, and then couple that with close ties to Cuba and close ties to the Soviet Union in terms of both military assistance and otherwise, it creates a real problem for the United States, both militarily, economically, politically, and otherwise. And because of that, what started out as a genuine effort under the last administration to try to work with the new government in Nicaragua and to provide some funds and to continue a dialogue and try to nurture it along, to have it carry out its economic concepts and its alleged democratic institutions in terms of free press, free church, free elections, etc., we had to cut that money off. And nothing that's happened since that date in the Carter administration has convinced anybody that there's been any change for the better there. And consequently, we're caught in the morass of the problem we have with respect to Nicaragua. And we need to do something the best we can there in order to help that situation out if we can in the diplomatic process. It'd be great if that works out through Contadora, OAS, or any other way that anybody can figure out. In Guatemala, we're nurturing the incipiency there of a democratic government. And we want to do what we can within limits to make sure that the election which you're going to hold will actually be held in October. They now have the Constitution. They've had the Constitutional Assembly. They're going to go to the election, the national elections. And if that comes off in October with a civilian government, that'll be a big step forward. And we, the United States, in a reasonable way, need to encourage that through economics and otherwise. That's our policy, and we're doing it. I didn't say it was all good and that we wave a magic wand, it's all going to go away. Politics doesn't operate in a vacuum because we got the pressures down there, the economic pressures of people where 80% of the people are not part of the economic political mainstream of their country, and the external pressures of the Cubans and the Soviets complicate the problem.
You said, sir, that Israel was our only friend in the Middle East. And the question, I believe, is, doesn't that divide the world unnecessarily into friends and enemies?
Well, I might be taken to task for a slight exaggeration, but no, it's not indefensible. And if we had the time, I'd be willing to do it ad infinitum with you. But suffice it to say, in a broad general sense, that the mutuality of the interests that we have with Israel are very real and very important to the United States as they are to Israel. That does not denigrate in any way the kind of things that we're doing with Egypt or with Saudi Arabia or trying to do with Jordan, or that we tried to do in Lebanon, and that we at one time tried to do with Syria. And that's a whole story in itself, by itself. No, I don't mean to divide the world up into two camps in that sense. And I must admit that slight exaggeration of my words in describing the relationship between the United States and Israel could have left that impression. I'm glad that you caught me up on it, and I had the opportunity to correct it in some degree.
Why haven't we given, the United States, given more aid to the Afghan rebels? And possibly could that aid be a negotiating point with the Soviets at Geneva?
Let me answer the last part of that first. The answer to that is absolutely positively not. It cannot be and will not be used by this country as a negotiating ticket at Geneva. First of all, it isn't. And the Soviets wouldn't even pay any attention to it. Secondly, we as a people are so committed with respect to the violation of the sovereign rights of the people of Afghanistan. The whole world is. I think the Soviets were the most surprised people in the world when they had a resolution went through the UN with 103 countries voting against them on their action in Afghanistan. So no, there's no skullduggery here going around. We have not backed off as a nation. Now, the issue of whether or not we want to send more aid is a legitimate issue, and that's being discussed constantly.
I think we can...
Okay, thank you. I enjoyed it.
I think we can safely say that there's been a wide range of questions tonight, and we're impressed with the dexterity of Representative Fascell in dealing with them. I think he shared with us both good sense and wisdom, and it makes one have a certain level of confidence in our representative system and with the way that we're being represented in Washington. We appreciate the pleasure of the evening and the encouragement that it's yielded. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
It was good to have you join the members of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs for this evening's session. A transcript of the program is available at a cost of $5. The Council is a private, non-profit, non-position-taking organization dedicated to foreign affairs education. Membership is open to the public, to all citizens seriously interested in foreign affairs. For membership information, merely call the Council at 727-2150 or write to Suite 2155 at the World Trade Center.